There are reports Saudi Arabia is demanding money from senior officials it recently arrested. Crown Prince Mohammed Bin Salman says it's an anti-corruption operation, but many say it's a way for him to increase his power. So how far will he go? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. He's stoking huge tension in an already volatile region. Saudi Arabia's 32-year-old Crown Prince Mohammed Bin Salman has made a number of controversial decisions that many believe could forever change the kingdom and the entire region. The developments in Saudi Arabia and what they mean for the rest of the world have been the focus of a conference in London on Saturday. That's where former diplomats and Middle East analysts have been meeting to discuss the crisis and Saudi Arabia's future. Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS as he's known, was appointed Saudi Arabia's heir to the throne just 6 months ago. But in that short period, he's amassed a lot of power. Earlier this month, he ordered the arrest of around 200 princes, government officials and businessmen in what he called an anti-corruption drive. Various media outlets have now reported the detainees have been offered their freedom in exchange for most of their wealth. In neighbouring Yemen, Mohammed bin Salman is stuck in a conflict with Iran-backed Houthi rebels. The Crown Prince has also been accused of forcing the resignation of Lebanese Prime Minister Saad Hariri, who made the sudden announcement in Riyadh. And in June, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain and Egypt severed ties with Qatar, triggering an unprecedented crisis in the Gulf region. Many see these developments as Saudi Arabia's attempt to confront its rival Iran, which it blames for spreading violence in Yemen, Lebanon, Syria and Iraq. So plenty for us to discuss. Let's do so now with our guests. Joining us from London, from that conference we mentioned, Pierre Conesa, lecturer at the Paris Institute for Political Studies. From Tunis, Sami Hamdi, editor-in-chief of the International Interest. And joining us via Skype from Munich, Afshin Shahi, a senior lecturer in international relations and Middle East politics at the University of Bradford. A very warm welcome to all of you. Sami, let's start with you and kick off by looking, first of all, at these reports of this deal. The princes and businessmen who were arrested being offered their freedom in return for billions of dollars. How true are those reports?
How true they are, nobody really knows, but it would fit into the whole scenario of the tradition of that princes simply do not go to jail, princes are not executed, princes do not suffer the full force of the law. That's the reality in Saudi Arabia. Also, it's one of the worst kept secrets in Saudi Arabia that many individuals who have this abundance of wealth tend to do so through connections within the government and through corruption. So in other words, Mohammed bin Salman is effectively, if these reports are true, he's effectively saying to them, look, we all know that you got this money through corruption. I'll let you guys go because we're all in it, but I really need some money right now because our coffers are nearly empty. I need some money to drive Vision 2030. I need some money to drive these mega cities that I'm proposing. I need some money to show US companies, Japanese companies, South Korean companies that I actually have projects in which they can invest and they can bring money back into the kingdom. I think Mohammed bin Salman with this move has achieved two things. One, he's managed to push away his political opponents, Mit'ab bin Abdullah, Walid bin Talal, and some of these other various different princes. And on the other hand, he's trying to get as much money as possible with which to finance his very ambitious projects to stand up to Iran.
So, Pierre, it's a win-win for MBS if it works. But the question is, of course, will it work? Will these very wealthy businessmen and princes give up vast amounts of their wealth?
Well, I think that the recent campaign of anti-corruption against corruption in Saudi Arabia is mainly a political aspect of the march to the power for MBS, you know, because it's quite surprising to hear that in this country an anti-corruption program would be efficient. Just let me quote some example. For example, he arrests the head of the National Guard. You know that the National Guard is 100,000 people just designed to protect the regime. And if he arrests the leader of this National Guard, it's a very important aspect because, for example, the last contract signed by the National Guard was the Canadian contract for armed vehicle of an amount of $15 billion, which means that, for example, he's beheading all the National Guard hierarchy. Just other example, he arrests the head of the Navy, which is a Sultan member, or the member of the Sultan part of the family, the Sudairi. And so, which means that, for example, the father of the one he has been arrested assigned all the armament contracts for the last 40 years, which means that it's quite impossible to think that it will just stop after the arrest. I mean, a lot of foreign armament company will be concerned in the months coming. So it's a very disturbing campaign, which could be, we could have, significant effect inside the country, but also outside.
Okay, Afshin, what are your views on this purge? How are you seeing it from where you're standing?
This is not really about a win-win situation. If anything, this is about a lose-lose situation. Initially, we thought that this is primarily about an attempt for centralization of power. He was using the context of anti-corruption policies in order to purge his political opponents. Your first contributor just mentioned that maybe the new crown prince is using this opportunity to attract some fund, particularly at the time that Saudi Arabia is facing with some economic and financial difficulties. But if we look at this situation and examine the impact of these policies, what the message, the real message which is at the moment coming from Saudi Arabia is about confusion. I think the prevailing climate of confusion is basically summarizing the policies of Mohammed Bin Salman. First of all, overnight, he basically organized anti-corruption committee, and he arrested a number of high-profile people. And in a matter of less than 10 days, he told them, okay, if you are responsible for some significant economic misconduct, it doesn't matter, as long as you can pay us a little bit of money, you are free. So obviously, this doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. I mean, politically, it is a very bad move, and economically, obviously, it's going to send a very problematic message to the foreign investors outside Saudi Arabia. And this actually taking us to the real point that it seems that the new political elite, and in particular the crown prince, has no realistic understanding of how politics internally and externally works.
Sami, to what extent do you agree with that, Sami? Is this crackdown going to backfire on Mohammed bin Salman?
Well, first of all, I'd like to state that BlackRock strongly disagrees with what the guest has just said, because they think they're about to open an office in Riyadh, as are other American companies. The fact of the matter is, by pressing down on these businessmen, one of Saudi's biggest problems economically, and why it has deterred some investors in the past, is because of the monopolies that many of these people who've been arrested hold. What Mohammed bin Salman is showing to the US and to foreign investors is that under my regime, there will no longer be these monopolies. I am opening up these industries for you. So whilst the politics, we can discuss it, the economics, much as I disagree with what Mohammed bin Salman has done, the economics appear sound in a very crude way. With regards to the politics, whether this crackdown will actually work or not, the reality is that Mohammed bin Salman has been on a meteoric rise for quite some time, since his father has come to power. Removing Mohammed bin Nayef as crown prince was no small feat. And in fact, he was only able to do it because Donald Trump came to power and started fighting with the Pentagon. The Pentagon loved Mohammed bin Nayef to the extent that at the beginning of this year, the CIA awarded the first ever prize to a Saudi prince for combating terrorism to Mohammed bin Nayef, which was a clear message to MBS, to Mohammed bin Salman, that you should stop where you're at because we want Mohammed bin Nayef. Only when Trump went to Riyadh and saw the glamour and the gold and said, you know what, guys, you guys aren't so bad. Qatar must be the problem. Iran must be the problem. He went back, clashed with James Mattis and clashed with the Pentagon, and Mohammed bin Salman realized this was the best opportunity to become crown prince. On a Machiavellian, Macbeth-esque kind of politics, Mohammed bin Salman is playing a very shrewd, very competent game. Think about the political situation as it stands now in Saudi Arabia. Who stands in his way? Mit'ab bin Abdullah, the National Guard, is arrested. Walid bin Talal, who gambled on Hillary Clinton and lost, has now been arrested. Nobody else stands in his way. Mohammed bin Nayef has surrendered the Interior Ministry and has gone now to receive treatment for his illnesses. Nobody stands in Mohammed bin Salman's way anymore. All that's left is for his father to abdicate. So from putting all morality aside, from a political perspective, how is this anything but a very real-life Game of Thrones in which bin Salman is winning?
OK, Pierre, we just had Sami basically saying that no one now stands in Mohammed bin Salman's way. He's played a very successful political game. Does that not cause concern from the outside, that indeed no one now stands in Mohammed bin Salman's way? This purge has got rid of all of his opponents.
Well, you know, I think that we have to analyze the political process in Saudi Arabia all along the year, in the year 2017. In the beginning of the month, he arrests some clerics, he arrests some people, he arrests journalists, intellectuals, etc. And now, in the last purge, he arrests a lot of crown princes and ministers and businessmen. The first evidence is that he don't arrest a member of Al-Sheikh family, which means that he doesn't arrest a guy in charge of religious politics in Saudi. When Mohammed bin Salman promised a new Islam in Saudi Arabia, he would have to attack first the power of the clerics, which he didn't. The two clerics he arrested in the last purge was mainly the guy coming from the Sahwa, you know, the movement following the 1991 events, and asking for a democratic reform, not a democratic, but a reform.
Pierre, if I can just jump in there, because he has attacked the religious police, hasn't he? He's taken away some of their powers in a move ostensibly to, some may say, liberalize the society there in Saudi.
Yes, you know, by the past, there were some crises between the religious hierarchy and the regime. But in fact, the question is that the clerics are having the hand on education, on justice, on the library, on cultural policy, etc., etc. Which means that sometimes, you know, the kingdom can give some evidence, some sign, you know, of liberalization, like, for example, the authorization for women to drive in the next year. But, I mean, what does mean exactly that gesture? I mean, if you don't attack the very heart of the Wahhabi Salafist power inside the Saudi Arabia, that will have no change in the situation. They will not have, you know, Islam of peace and love.
Well, the Saudi Crown Prince's actions have been worrying politicians around the world. And just earlier this week, the New York Times reported US officials increasingly concerned with his decisions, saying they could damage US interests. The report also suggested those steps have made investors nervous. And criticism from Germany has prompted Saudi Arabia to recall its ambassador to Berlin. German Foreign Minister Sigmar Gabriel suggested on Thursday that former Lebanese Prime Minister Saad Hariri had been held against his will in Riyadh. Gabriel also called for Lebanon's neighbours, including Saudi Arabia, to let it decide its own fate. Now, Gabriel made the statement just before Hariri travelled to Paris. Afshin, we've not seen much criticism of Saudi from Europe. What prompted the German foreign minister to say this, to launch ahead with this criticism?
Just like before I respond to that, actually, it is absolutely essential that I respond to the comments which were made by Sami at the beginning. Because he suggested that basically arresting these highly important businessmen potentially can send a positive message to the international investors. But actually, when we do look at the ways in which the international markets have reacted to the recent developments in Saudi Arabia, basically we see exactly the opposite picture. Because the most important and the most fundamental aspect for any kind of international investor is political stability. And in addition to political stability, you need an independent judiciary or an effective judiciary which could kind of protect your investment. When there is kind of the climate of kind of confusion, when you can randomly kind of arrest people and ask them to kind of give you 70% of their asset in return for freedom. Clearly, this is not going to inspire a lot of confidence, and clearly,
let's just let
this is not going to...
Sami pick up on that, because, of course, these men have been charged with corruption, but we haven't seen them coming in front of the judiciary, have we, Sami?
No, and I think anybody who's dealt with Saudi Arabia for the last 30 years is aware that the playing field is very different from the international standards that my honourable friend is discussing. So whilst I agree with him on the objective, on the principled side of things, I don't really see how anybody has ever really applied this to doing business in Saudi Arabia. The US companies have still managed to operate, South Korean companies have operated, Japanese companies have operated. So I agree with him on the principles, but I don't think those are really that fundamental essentials with regards to BlackRock, with regards to some of these other companies that have announced with Trump's backing that they will buy into Mohammed bin Salman's economic vision.
But are we going to see any more foreign investors coming, or is that very much a Trump-led move?
To be honest, we're discussing a lot about Mohammed bin Salman's radical decisions, but what worries me is that we're taking all of this as if it's a surprise. I feel like we should be looking at this through the Saudi lens, which is that at the end of the day, to the east you have Iran, to the north you have Iraq, Lebanon and Syria, all of which are under Iranian influence. To the south you have Houthi, who's controlling Sana'a, the capital, and to the west you have Egypt, which is not really participating in any one of these countries on your side. So this sudden burst of reaction, this sudden change in foreign policy is a reaction to a very real reality, which is that Saudi Arabia is surrounded. The only solution for Saudi Arabia here is very hard, very decisive decisions. And that's why all of a sudden Mohammed bin Salman is coming to power. He's implementing very decisive foreign policy decisions. I'm not suggesting that I agree with any of them. But what I'm saying is we should not look at these as surprises. Even if we focus on the economy or focus on the politics, very radical change is needed. And Mohammed bin Salman knows it, King Salman knows it, Mit'ab bin Abdullah knows it, Walid bin Talal knows it. And the reason I mentioned these last two is because these two are also competing to become king, because they genuinely believe that the cautious approach that's been taken by Saudi Arabia over the years just simply doesn't work anymore. And the interesting thing is, and I'll finish just on this point before handing over, the interesting point is this: for years, American officials have lamented Saudi Arabia's cautious policy in the Middle East. Now they have a prince, or they have a de facto leader, who's willing to bring Saudi Arabia and allow it to become engaged in the wars that the US wants to fight in the region. From the US perspective, let's not look at the US media or whatnot, from the US government perspective, they're actually quite welcoming of somebody like Mohammed bin Salman, somebody who's ready to take these issues by the scruff of the neck. Not saying that I agree with anything he said, and I'm surprised about some of the words coming out of my mouth.
Okay. You have to stand by them, though. They are being recorded. Pierre, what's your response to that? Are you surprised by these moves, or do you think, as we've just heard from Sami, that a radical change is needed? Saudi is right to feel threatened by the geopolitics of the region, and these bold moves are necessary.
Well, everybody can agree. I mean, this country needs a radical change, but is Mohammed bin Salman the good guy for this change? I am a little bit surprised by the, I would say, the contradictory aspect of his politics. For example, he's inviting to a business forum a lot of foreign businessmen to explain that they have to invest in Saudi Arabia. And a few days after, he decided the anti-bribery commission, the most efficient anti-corruption commission, because the day after the creation is arrest more than 200 people inside the country. So, I mean, do you think that the businessman will be trustful with a so changing landscape in economic affairs? Other contradiction. I mean, he wants foreign investor to come in Saudi Arabia, but the country is surrounded by crisis, international crisis. Some of these crises have been triggered by the regime itself. I mean, Mohammed bin Salman was directly involved in the war against Yemen. Saudi Arabia is occupying Bahrain and is triggering a crisis with Qatar, the blockade, which looks like the Hitler ones, you know, against Czechoslovakia before the Second World War. I mean, I don't understand why this guy is so, I would say, so contradictory. The only explanation I have in mind is that, you know, the son of a dictator is worse than the dictator itself, because the dictator has some political experience, but the son, with his habit, you know, as young as it was to be completely supported by everybody, could decide some very contradictory decision, and that's a problem in that region. It's a very unstable actor today.
Afshin, some strong words there, that the son of the dictator is worse than the dictator himself. Is that something that you might agree with?
Yes, I mean, I don't know in what context exactly that was mentioned, but I just go actually to the point, which was again made by Sami just a few minutes ago. Because when we do kind of look at kind of the foreign policy of Saudi Arabia, when we look at kind of some of the signature policies which were designed and delivered by Mohammed bin Salman, they have produced nothing but disaster for Saudi Arabia. If you look at the ways in which he conducted his anti-Houthi policies in Yemen, it primarily undermined the Saudi position. 2 years after that disastrous war, not only the Saudi-led coalition have not been able to curb the Houthis, but actually their frontiers, their borders are more insecure today than 2 years ago. And at the same time, he's responsible for this absolutely foreign policy disaster, kind of the gold crisis, which in my opinion effectively brought an end to one of the most effective kind of security establishment in this region, which could maintain a more favorable balance of power in favor of Saudi Arabia, and I'm talking about GCC. The gold prices,
despite all those foreign policy disasters, perhaps as we could say, I just want to, we're running out of time, I just want to quickly bring in Israel here, because that's quite an interesting potential manoeuvre. The interview the Defence Forces chief gave to a Saudi newspaper just a few days ago, saying it's ready, Israel is ready to share intel with Saudi. It's sort of been an open secret, but now it's out there in the public that these two sides are willing to cooperate. I mean, how unprecedented is that?
This is extremely unprecedented. I mean, this is the first time in history that kind of somebody as high profile as Israeli chief of staff giving a public interview to kind of Saudi media. And obviously that brought an end to many months of speculations that the Saudis and the Israelis are getting closer and closer to form a kind of alliance against Iran. But we shouldn't only look at this situation from the foreign policy point of view. I mean, of course, it has some serious regional implications, particularly when it comes to Saudi against Iran. But it also will have some internal political implications, because the Saudi society is not monolithic, is divided based on tribes, kind of culture and religion, and it's such a complicated society. And without any doubt, a large segment of the Saudi population is not going to be terribly happy and satisfied with this new.
I'm just going to jump in there to get one last point to Sami. We've seen Mohammed bin Salman do an extraordinary amount of things in a very short space of time. Just look into your crystal ball. What do you think he's going to do next?
I'll answer your question just very quickly. Just with regards, I tend to dislike when people use Yemen as an example of Saudi failure, only because while I accept Saudi has demolished Yemen, Saudi only got involved with Yemen when Houthi was on the gates of Aden and only one city left to conquer. When Houthi went into Amman, nobody said anything. Sana'a, nobody said anything. Ta'iz, nobody said anything.
The Yemen issue is another inside story.
With regards to what's coming next,
Sami.
with regards to what we... Sure. 30 seconds, no problem. What we can expect from Mohammed bin Salman, after reading the very logical steps that he's taken, putting morality aside again, the logical steps of removing Mohammed bin Nayef, removing Mita' bin Abdullah, removing Walid bin Talal, there's only one man that stands in his way now, and that is his father, King Salman. Now all he has to do left is to ask his father, Father, please, can you step aside now and can you give me the throne? From King Salman's perspective, from this Arab pride perspective, I'm sure nothing would please King Salman more than to have his progeny rule Saudi Arabia for many, many generations to come. So I think that's the next move. When will it come? It depends on how successful some of these foreign policy moves are. But that's what I see left in front of Mohammed bin Salman in his incredible quest for power.
Let's watch this space. Many thanks to all our guests for joining us here today. A very interesting discussion indeed. Pierre, Conesa, Sami, Hamdi and Afshin Shahi. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, that's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here. Bye for now.